Let's get into our Power Poller's thoughts on 5 new questions, including: is it right for Illinois Democrats to retaliate with gerrymandering of their own? Should mega projects like a new Bears Stadium get a 40-year tax freeze? And was President Trump justified in federalizing law enforcement in the District of Columbia? Welcome to our August 2025 edition of the Power Poll Podcast. On our panel in this episode, two voices that hold truth to power like few others. Mike Flannery is, of course, the Dean of Chicago Political Reporters. Thanks for being here, Mike.
You bet, Tom. Happy to do it.
Great. Our special guest this month is a brilliant State House reporter, Chicago Street reporter, Chicago Tribune alum, and author of the book, The House That Madigan Built. Welcome to two-time Pulitzer Prize finalist Ray Long, and a graduate of the University of Illinois Public Affairs Reporting Program started by Paul Simon. Ray, thank you for being here.
Good to be here, Tom. I think I should sign off now after that intro there. Thank you very much. But you are a PAR graduate yourself, so.
A few years before you.
It's good to be here, man. Thank you.
And you just recently retired, so you're kind of enjoying the fruits of your labor. Is that right?
Well, I'm, checking on things like making sure I get the senior tax break and all that kind of stuff.
Now, the first question in the August 2025 Power Poll is: Governor Pritzker has recently been in the spotlight for his support of Texas Democrats fleeing Texas redistricting battles. What's your take on the governor's action? 33% said they strongly disagree with the governor. 10% somewhat disagree. 10% said somewhat agree. 40% said strongly agree, and 7% uncertain. Now we're going to go to Mike for the answer to this first question. Mike, what's your take? It looks like 43% disagree, 50% agreeing.
Yeah, it's a closely divided power poll group this time, Tom. And I think that's because what's going on is unseemly at a minimum. This is not the way the system's supposed to work. And there's going to be even worse consequences in Illinois than we've already experienced from the gerrymander that we have. Yeah, Illinois is a state that leans heavily Democratic, but Donald Trump got about 43% of the vote last time. If you take that as a stand-in for a base Republican vote, the Democrats down in Springfield don't deserve that supermajority in which they have, 2/3 plus of the state lawmakers.
Right. I was surprised. I thought those numbers were a lot tighter than they would have been. Ray, you've been watching the governor's office for 40 years, maybe more. You've been writing about the Speaker of the House, the legislative process. You're very well tuned to what's going on. What's your take on the Power Poller's response to the governor's actions?
Well, I have the same kind of response that Mike does. And I think this shows where they are, where the populace is. I don't think the populace really understands redistricting or the stakes and how politically wild and crazy it can get when they're cutting these district lines here. This is a cutthroat process that outdoes every other political partisan cutthroat process, because this is a matter of life and death in the careers of these lawmakers. What strikes me about the way the state is already gerrymandered is that even before this effort was done by Chris Welch, the House Speaker, and Don Harmon, the Senate President, it was also what I thought was pushed to the limits under Mike Madigan, who in 2001 oversaw the previous redistricting. And I had actually noted in the book that you referenced there that a political writer, after redistricting 2011, wrote flatly that Madigan had, quote, punched his ticket to the partisan Hall of Fame when he constructed the congressional map in 2011. It was so lopsided then, but then Chris Welch and Harmon pushed it even further. So it's really difficult to see how, you can come out and complain strongly that gerrymandering is a bad thing elsewhere when you're doing it already as far as you can in Illinois. However, what they're doing in Texas is a decade reapportionment. And that is virtually unheard of. Although, testing you guys' knowledge, Richard J. Daley, the first Mayor Daley, actually tried it in 1975 to try to knock out Abner Mikva, but it never got passed in the legislature.
And Texas did it at the urging of Texas Congressman Tom DeLay.
Yeah.
They've done it before.
Yeah.
And so I think that group, that 40% who strongly agree there, Tom, I think that what they're probably focused on is fighting fire with fire, as the governor says.
Yes.
Well, I mean, when I started in the press room in Springfield in 72, 73, somewhere in there, we had 24 congressmen. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had 13 Democrats, 11 Republicans.
Yeah.
They have pushed the state to the limits. They really have. Okay, we'll go on to the number 2 question. People are moving out of Illinois at a notable rate, with the state experiencing domestic outmigration for over a decade, though the pace has slowed somewhat in recent years. What do you think is the biggest reason people are moving out of Illinois? Here I was surprised. 0% said poor education. 8% said political and ideological dissatisfaction. 10% said weak job market and economic stagnation. 8%, only an 8% crime and public safety concerns. 17% said rising cost of living and housing affordability, and 56% said high taxes, fiscal burden. We're going to go to you this time, Ray, to kick this one off.
I think this is very telling. This is a great question, Tom, because Democrats are always trying to push aside the idea that they're raising taxes, and Pritzker has been in the tax raising mode for ever since he's been governor. He even tried to raise the rate on the folks with the biggest paychecks, and that failed in a referendum. High taxes and the rising cost of living, you put those two things out there, and folks are just showing their real colors here. These are things that every politician of every party should be looking at. The stunning thing, as you pointed out, was 0 folks are complaining about the quality of the education. And I think there's probably some more people who are concerned about crime or political and ideological dissatisfaction, but man, 0 worrying about public education. That is a real shocker to me.
Right, Mike?
I think it's probably a different answer from different demographic groups, Tom. I think that for particularly African Americans in the city of Chicago, where so much of the violent crime has for a couple of generations been focused, I think for many parents there that I've talked to who have left, they're now in suburban Atlanta or they're outside of Houston or Dallas. Crime and affordability are big issues, but especially crime, especially for parents of young African-American men, male teens. It's got to be scary to be raising a young African-American teenager on the west side or the south side. I think for others where crime is not perhaps as urgent a question in the immediate neighborhood, those taxes, especially for retirees, older citizens who, again, for 2 or 3 generations have been moving south for the weather and for the lower taxes.
The other thing is that, a lot of people here in the city are worried about maybe even higher taxes because the city is faced with a fiscal cliff. The CTA is faced with a fiscal cliff, and somebody's going to end up having to pay, or they're going to have to make some serious cuts. And I think a lot of people are thinking, they got to get this straightened out here, or I'm going to be pulling more money out of my pocket to try to help these governments that I'm not sure I really want to have around anyway.
We actually have a blueprint for cuts that could be made. It's been out there for 10 or 20 years. The number of fires in the city of Chicago has declined by more than 80% compared to the 1950s, yet we still have the exact same number of firehouses. We're spending 8 figures for those big, complicated pieces of equipment that in some cases hardly ever are called upon to fight a fire. Now we need some more ambulance crews, and we may need more ambulances, but There have been studies done. We could close 1/3 at least of the firehouses. We have 200 schools that are scandalously under-enrolled, and yet we have this Board of Education talking about borrowing and putting the taxpayers on the hook for more down the road. It's irresponsible and it's cowardly.
Right. Okay, number 3, the third question we asked. As of August 2025, Bears President Kevin Warren has publicly urged lawmakers to pass legislation during this fall's veto session in Springfield that would designate large-scale developments like their proposed $3 to $5 billion stadium mixed-use project as a mega project. This would lock in property tax assessments at the site's current vacant land value, which they say is around $33 million, for up to 40 years, rather than reflecting that massive value increase from improvements. The Bears would then be permitted to negotiate an annual payment with local officials in lieu of a standard property tax payment. Boy, this is a mouthful. Without this, Warren claims the project won't proceed. Here's the question. Should the Illinois legislature pass the mega project's property tax break bill for the Chicago Bears? 66% of the power pollers said no. 25% said yes, and 9% said they were uncertain. Well, I'm going to throw this back to Mike to kick off. I'd just like to ask you, Mike, how many Chicago legislators in Springfield would vote to allow the Bears a tax break so that they could move out of the city? I mean, I don't understand this at all.
Well, the answer is probably close to zero, if not absolutely zero, Tom. And the problem, the political problem for Kevin Warren and George McCaskey and the rest of the people who oversee the Bears is that the Soldier Field redo 40 years ago has still not been paid for. Now, the Bears had nothing to do with that. That was a series of mayors and governors and lawmakers who failed to pay off that bonding. And so there's hundreds of millions of dollars that's owed. And Chicago lawmakers are not going to allow the Bears to get out of town at a minimum until a deal has been reached to pay off that debt.
I think Mike's absolutely right. And the other thing is, I think there's a lot of people who think they don't want the Bears to leave Chicago, and there's multiple other ways to do it. And a lot of people are like, here, this is a multi-billion-dollar project, and these rich folks who own the Bears want more buy-in or more money out of our pockets to pay for their giant stadium that will just make them more money. I mean, they're not even guaranteeing that Caleb Williams will throw for 1,000 yards or anything with that, but they need to think about what is going on. I mean, it's not even fully creative here in Chicago about what could be done, the footprint of Soldier Field, or whether you could even expand Soldier Field, or people will say, no, you can't, but there's a half a wall there that practically is wide open for expansion, and just a little creativity. Is there possibility of putting a dome over it? Maybe that's not possible. Maybe it is. Maybe it's been studied. Maybe it's been studied in a way that was supposed to come up with the conclusion that it couldn't be changed. Is there another place right next to it on the parking lot? Can you make it better? A lot of folks are skeptical that they need to move out to Arlington Heights. And, Bears fans, they just want a winning team.
Right. But $3 to $5 billion, moving that to Arlington Heights, and within, they say, 5 years of the structure being done, the Super Bowl would be there. And if they host the Super Bowl, that's millions and millions and billions in exposure and resources. I just think you need somebody in City Halls thinking big picture, long term, and tie the community. And the Bears, I believe the McCaskey family, they love Chicago, and you could work with them. But somebody's going to have to be really strong at the table. I mean, it's not going to get done in a veto session. I just don't see that at all. I mean, you've been down there 50 years. Is it going to get done down there, Ray?
No, I don't see that happening. It's not going to happen unless it's going to stay in Chicago. I mean, if they could come up with some kind of deal that would keep it in Chicago, I think there's a chance, but that's still an outside long shot.
Yeah, it is. The NFL has put on, I think, 2027 deadline on. They're not going to get it done. Nobody gets anything done. You look at the Obama library, the poor structure and the people around that neighborhood. I mean, it's been 10 years, but
Yeah.
I mean, even the president of the United States from his hometown is having a hard time with getting everything done. Anyway, question number 4. President Trump has deployed the National Guard to Washington, D.C., and has announced he will use the District of Columbia Home Rule Act to place the D.C. police under his control. What do you think of this decision by the president? 28% said this move is necessary, though crime has fallen in D.C. It still remains too high for police to handle alone. 16% said this move is unnecessary, but well within the powers of the president. 50% said this move is potentially an overreach of the presidential powers and could set a bad precedent if unchallenged. 6% said they were unsure. Okay, gentlemen, it's an open shot. Who wants to take the first shot here?
Well, I'll take a swing at it, Tom. I mean, the law that President Trump is using here specifies in black and white that he can do this as an emergency for 30 days. That's not very long when it comes to crime reduction or having a large impact on crime. You know, we have at times had Chicago members of the city council, black and white and Hispanic, have called for deploying the National Guard in Chicago under Mayor Lightfoot and, under previous mayors. And it wasn't done. But I keep coming back. So we're going to deploy the Illinois National Guard, whose members include a guy, or a few years ago included a guy I knew who ran a car wash in Elgin. He's a wonderful guy. But he was the first to tell me, you're going to put me down in the Austin neighborhood? You're going to put me down in Englewood? What? What am I going to do?
Set up shop.
Yeah, they're not trained to do that. I could see some slim thing where you put, and I'm just spitballing here, but I could see some kind of experiment where you put National Guard on like the CTA to try to calm that fervor that goes on there, because they need some kind of monitoring to bring people back to the trains. Otherwise, you have, all kinds of stuff going on there that you don't want having going on the trains. But that's not like out on patrol when you got to make quick decisions. We just saw that the whole Dexter Reed issue that came up, and police had to make quick decisions. It was controversial, and the state's attorney came down just this last week saying, look, we're not going to charge the cops who shot and killed Dexter Reed, because Reed, who may not have even realized there were cops, shot first. So these kinds of really difficult decisions of safety and public safety and when you shoot and when you don't are not the kind of things that the National Guard are trained to do.
That's well said. Relative to the decision about sending guardsmen to the city of Chicago, in his news conference, he had that throwaway comment, throwing his hand up in the air saying, well, even maybe Chicago. But, Mike, you're really good with the facts. He doesn't have the authority to do that.
No, not the way he does in D.C.
Right,
There's specific authorization in the laws that govern the District of Columbia. It is a federal enclave. D.C. is 69 square miles. It's the seat of the national government, and therefore the national government has special powers there. That whole legal apparatus does not exist in Chicago. The president does not have that kind of power in Chicago, or Miami, or L.A., or Baltimore.
Ray, just a quick follow-up question with you. I saw Morning Joe the other day, and they were talking about the fact that, all the Washington press corps is on this story, and they think it's a trap because you have a lot of people talking about the fact that this is not the right way to fight crime, but the perception of people is that there is crime. They say the facts are that the numbers are down, but the perception is still there. So, they keep complaining we're chasing this shiny object that he throws out all the time. As a political reporter, what would your instinct tell you about that?
I think there may be some overlap or after effect from the whole George Floyd period where we had uh, demonstrations in the street that really were out of control in many cities across the country. You see, major multiple shootings that happen all the time in Chicago, and they make the news, help put fear into people's heart about what it's like to be in Chicago. I'm from downstate. Still, I think there are people who downstate would never come to Chicago because they fear of the crime. Whether once they get here, they don't think it's too bad. But as you guys know, it's neighborhood to neighborhood, and you got to have an idea of where you're going. So there is a perception. I think the carjacking issue a couple of years ago put that up, put crime up in people's mind too. So it's not like there is no fear when you walk down the street, but it's less than it was a few years ago. Still, there are way too many murders. Still, there are way too many thefts. Still, there are way too many other types of crimes. But I do believe that crime is going down. The perception is different than the reality, but we all agree that there's too much crime.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
going to be visiting next month. My wife and I are going to spend a couple of weeks in Japan.
Ooh.
It's a country where in the whole country, I think about 100 million plus people. Last year, there were fewer than 100 murders. Already this year in Chicago, we've had, I think, close to 300 or 400. I think about 300. Just in a city of 2.5 million, 2.7 million. I mean, crime, whether it's up, down, or moving sideways, it's way too high here. There's too much violence, too much bloodshed. There are too many illegal guns on the streets. And for a certain group of people, Ray and Tom, I got to say, I think sending the National Guard, no matter what the problems are, once you get granular with it, some people are going to say, sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's who Trump's playing to.
And just on the other side, other people are going to say, you're crazy. What are you doing? So that's where the great divide is. And I think a lot of this also becomes ideological, or people have broken their politics into like a team blood sport, like you're cheering for the Packers and the Bears here when actually there are real lives on the line.
And I think that's the point that the Democrats, some of the leadership and the Democrats have said, hey, let's hold on here because let's not fall into this trap. I mean, interesting discussion. Our last question goes back to gerrymandering. Some states, including Illinois and California, have announced they will gerrymander their congressional maps in response to the Texans' plans to get rid of 5 Democratic-held seats. What do you think of this response? 29% said this will lead to more partisan division. 22% said necessary to balance the efforts of other states. 30% said Illinois is already gerrymandered significantly, so this will have very little impact. 13% said gerrymandering based on recent electoral maps may backfire as the base of both Republicans and Democratic parties has been in flux. And 6% said too soon to tell. Well, gentlemen, you want to kick this one off, Ray?
Yeah, sure. I think that it's interesting that the highest number is Illinois is already gerrymandered significantly, so this will have little impact. That's actually pretty perceptive. It'll be hard to squeeze another Democratic seat.
That's right.
How many ways they do it. I mean, like I went through earlier, that Mike Madigan had been cited by a political writer as punching his ticket to the Partisan Hall of Fame. And then Speaker Welch and President Harmon pushed it even further this time. And when you look at the map, it's kind of mind blowing to think that they are compact and contiguous, which is one of the used to be almost a hard line to move, but now it's like kind of a mushy guideline. Yeah, I think that there are legitimate reasons to say if Republicans start moving to pick up more seats in other states, and Democrats have got to do something. They can't just sit back and take it. And that is one of the problems with how Democratic base feels about the Democratic leaders now, that they just aren't fighting enough. I think there would be in the base of Democrats support to try to bend as many lines as possible to pick up Democratic seats if they make it a successful effort. In other states, Texas, Indiana is even talking about it now to try to squeeze some seats out there to get up more Republican seats. But, these mid-decade things, pretty soon, if you push it now, you'll be pushing it every year. And that would just get into Looney Tune time.
Interesting comment you made. I think you're accurate that a lot of people in the base don't believe the Democrats are fighting hard enough or fighting wise enough. Mike, what's your take?
I just think it's going to increase cynicism. It's going to decrease voter turnout. The people who think that these elections are rigged, Tom and Ray, are right. The politicians have chosen their voters rather than the voters choosing their politicians. And it's why around Illinois and around Texas and around Indiana, for that matter, and Wisconsin, in too many districts, there's no real contest in the general election. There are very, very few swing districts, and it looks like Indianapolis and Springfield and Austin in Texas, those state capitals are going to resound with cries for more blood from the turnip. They're going to try to squeeze some more partisan seats out of this, and I think it's dreadful in the long run for democracy.
Yeah, and
Right.
Tom, when Obama returned to Springfield when he was president, one of his key points was that gerrymandering is out of control. And he said, today technology allows parties in power to precision draw constituencies so that the opposition supporters are packed into as few districts as possible. That's why our districts are shaped like earmuffs or spaghetti. And it's also one party can get more seats even when it gets fewer votes. So it is a situation that is fixable, but there is no will to do it. And it's almost like nuclear disarmament if you just let Texas go out and do whatever they want to help Republicans and the Democrats don't do anything in return.